Jason Maynard. I'm a senior technical solutions architect. I actually work at Cisco, focused on cybersecurity. So live and breathe security every day. This session, I've done this at B-Sides Edmonton a few years ago. It's a little bit of a combination of some of the things that are happening today, as well as taking a step back and looking at security a little bit differently, and more specifically around an architectural approach to security. And so this is a method that you can use. It's 100% product agnostic, has nothing to do with product, is all about capabilities. And so we'll get started. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit real quick about who can benefit from the session. We'll talk about industry challenges. We'll talk about the point product approach, and then we'll do a security as an architectural approach. So we'll do a kind of a walkthrough and kind of some of the outputs that you probably like to get doing this session, but it's really about taking a step back. Also, I'm not on video because I'm on a satellite uplink, and so there's about 1,000 millisecond latency, and I thought, seeing some of the other videos today, they were a little bit choppy, and I thought it'd be best to have that off. All right, so who can benefit? It could be anybody, right? That dabbles in security. It could be on the red team. It could be on the blue team. It could be a combination of these teams, right? And you may have seen this before, but this just talks about, the red team's more the attacker side, right? You got the blue team that defends. There's a yellow team or a sub team that's kind of created called the build team, so building the infrastructure. And then there's these sub teams. It doesn't really matter that the team that you're on. I think this is a valuable exercise for all teams. So if you have a security hat, even if it's not a core competency, you certainly should be in these discussions. Also, even if you're on help desk and don't have a security role, or you're an application developer or in compliance risk, you should certainly think about including these people, because they're going to provide tremendous value during these sessions. So the image here I stole off of, I found it on Calgary YouTube channel. And so, give credit to whoever created it, but that's where the image came from. So what are some of the challenges, right? And I kind of break them out here, and there's so many. Everybody that's on the defense side knows about it. And if you've been on the adversarial side, like from a red teamer perspective, you certainly know there's a tremendous opportunity out there, right? And so we got things like phishing, right? Malware, forensics, right? You got system hygiene. You've got direct internet connectivity, right? Work from home, the challenges with work from home now, right? And I heard some sessions earlier, everyone rushed to get work from home up and running. And I think security took a back seat. And now we're starting to see people circle back. You got social engineering, you got DNS outages, you've got split tunneling, credential theft. The adversary's well-funded. You got water holing attacks, sextortion, right? The adversarial side now is more profitable than the drug trade, right? So the point being here is that we're up against a tremendous adversary, right? That's well-funded and has very, very strong skill sets. So if cybercrime was a country, it would have the 13th largest GDP, just to put it in perspective, right? And really taking the approach to security that we have up to now is not done us the service that we probably deserve, right? And a lot of times it's more reactionary, and I'll talk a little bit about that. 1.5 trillion in profit in 2018, again, well-funded. Skill set shortages, right? Internally, all you wonderful folks that are attending B-Sides, right, are trying to change the game. But we need more and more and more people from every single background, right? I think Canada's got 8,000 cybersecurity skill set shortages coming up in the next 2 years. I've seen numbers of 350,000 open headcount in the US, 3.5 million globally, right, by 2021 or 2022. Whether you buy into those numbers and what those roles might be, I think it does tend to lean towards there is a shortage, period. And there's more, right? And then you get complexity, right? And this is something that's interesting, really, around security, or the security space in general, right? Because if you look at other architectures, they don't have the same levels of complexity. And so, for the most part, as a defender, you're going to have capabilities like this, right? And you're going to go to market, and you have lots of vendors to choose from, so much that you could actually make things up, right? And I've done this, and I've learned not to do this, because I ended up calling somebody out. But I was at a government organization, and I talked about a new endpoint capability, and I called it Cybersecurity Ninja. And I talked and described about it, and then I asked the room of about 20 people if anybody heard about it, and somebody raised their hand. I made it up. Like, unless maybe they knew something I didn't, but I made it up. I was just going on about trying to prove the point that this market is very, very saturated. And so you've got these up and comers that have new features and gets people excited, and they fizzle away, or they get bought out by a larger organization. There's just so many vendors. And the problem is really pulling it all together and making it work. And there's much more, right? This is just an example of it, right? And RSA had hundreds and hundreds of vendors attend. We're not talking about attendees. We're talking about vendors. And to put it in perspective, think about it, right? If I was asking anybody in the networking field to name 10 to 15 vendors, they would struggle, right? Same thing with systems, storage, right? Again, in security, I can make things up. I can say whatever I want. And most often you're going to have to Google it to see whether or not it's true, right? And it just exudes the complexity that exists out there. And so what I've always said is, what are you doing different than everybody else, right? Because the model that we've chosen, this fragmented security approach to security, has been done by every single person out there, right? Like, if you look at it, if anything, a lot of these organizations have bigger budgets. Not seeing file share. Oh, sorry, that was my message. That's hilarious. Anyways, lots of other organizations have already been there, done that, right? They probably have larger budgets, and they may have as good as skill sets as you, but more of you, right? And the challenge is that they've been down this path trying to make it work, and it's failed. And so what I always ask is, what are you doing differently? If you take the same recipe, what is the end result? It's probably going to be the same, right? You got to start modifying the recipe, right? And so what are you doing to modify it? And so we've done this point product approach to security. And so if we take a step back and we look at how we built our infrastructure, we can see some of the problems, right? And so as an example, again, this is the walkthrough, because I know there's many different skill sets here today. Some people with advanced skill sets at building and architecting security infrastructure for a very, very long time. And there's people that are new to the field. And so when you break it down, we started out with a firewall, blocking the internet, right? The big bad internet. And then we've got a campus network, and you might have a couple of VLANs, right? Magical stuff happening here, right? You've got hosts, maybe with antivirus. As it starts to evolve, we start looking at web content. We start seeing some malicious activities. So we add some web security capabilities, more traditionally proxy focused at the time. And then we might have added IPS, right? We're feeling pretty confident, but the adversary continues to mature their capabilities. Right, as we start using AI and ML, there's nothing stopping the adversary from doing the same, right? And so they continue to advance their capabilities. We continue to build out more services. The clients and customers and business partners all want data. Data is, the new oil or the new gold, right? Everything's all about data. And so they want more of it, right? And they want to run MI or AI and ML against that, right? And maybe create services or optimizations that sets them apart from their competitors. And so we might be exposing more services, right? We might have AV. As we move along, we might add IPS, maybe even a web application firewall, right? You might have other things, right, here as well. You got a data center network, you got VLANs, again, servers. AV, right? You get the theme here. And maybe you have a firewall. I still don't see this in many organizations, right? Is a firewall to block or some type of advanced inspection mechanism from the campus to the data center. A lot of times we're still seeing this open in a lot of organizations. And so maybe you have a firewall, you add IPS, maybe a web application firewall as well, among other things. And as time goes on, you might add email security, right? Lots of threats come in in the form of email. We get more advanced. We get endpoint detection response. We add DNS layer protection. Now we're moving to the cloud, right? I forget who it was earlier, talked about cloud security, right? All the components you got to think about around cloud security, but that's exactly it. You have to take a step back and not look at it going, I need a CASB, because it's more than that, right? It might be an element of that, but you have to think of the broader picture. And so you might have added a cloud access security broker. And a lot of these, again, are more tactical. Now, I know we've gotten better to take a step back and think about the integrations of some of these technologies or using open protocols, right? But there's still a challenge, and I see it in a lot of organizations. Flow analysis, right? So understanding what the network looks like and baselining the environment, because all of these controls, no matter who you go with, whatever vendors you deploy, are going to fail, right? They're going to fail. There's nothing here that's going to provide 100% security effectiveness, period. And so the challenge now becomes, right? How do I know what's happening in the network if these defenses fail? So, detection or prevention is key, but detection and response are just as important. And so we continue to build this out. We get NAC, right? We're advancing again. And you know what? The environment's getting more and more secure, but as it's getting more and more secure, our challenge now becomes the complexity that we've introduced, right? Is managing this. Can I ask a question and get an answer back, right? Am I building data lakes to pull all that data in, and so I can run some type of analytics engine on top of it, right? It becomes much, much more complicated. Then you got macro and micro type segmentation in the campus environment. You start looking at doing a little bit of this in the data center as well. So we're certainly tightening up our posture. But then what about decryption, TLS 1.3, right? Application segmentation. You've got private cloud, public cloud, hybrid cloud, right? You've got database security. You've got vulnerability scanning. You got mobility, right? You've got SIM, sandboxing, and it goes on and on and on. And the problem with that is that's the easier part, right? Trying to understand a little bit of the controls that you might need. But now it's really trying to do something different with the recipe, right? Is, okay, if I did take this approach and it's fragmented, what about intelligence sharing, right? What about integration, right? Does my endpoint tell my firewall about the threat that it just saw, right? Does it tell my email security that it saw something, right? Like, these are things that we've got to think about. These things have to work together as a system. You've got systemic response. And so what happens is now it's time to renew, right? You've got a firewall. It's up for renewal. I have an L3, L4 type control. I've got a broken up IPS. I've got this content security that's all by itself. What do? We go to market. We put in a next gen firewall, right? The next gen label that never expires, right? It's always fresh, or is it, right? And so we may be adding next-gen firewall capabilities, and we might be sacrificing some of those capabilities, right? Because now it's a feature within the platform, and it may not be a core competency of that platform. Here nor there, again, we're adding these layers and we throw it in. So now we've got a next-gen firewall and we simplified our infrastructure moving forward, right? And then it comes IoT, right? Now, all of a sudden, new devices get added to the environment. How do you profile them? How do you posture them? How do you secure them? Can you install an agent? Most likely you can't, right? And you can think of this of any environment, right? Whether it's OT or IT. And then all of a sudden, things start to break. Things become very challenging, right? A user comes in, plugs into the network, the entire segment gets taken down, completely compromised. How did it happen? Did it happen off premise? Did it happen on premise? Was it based, do I have all the forensic data I need? Do I have all the DNS queries that were made? Do I have all the flow analytics? Do I have all the logs, right? All of these are things that we've got to think about. And so what we think is a better approach, right? We as defenders, is really taking a step back and truly understanding the risk, right, of the flows. So if we take a step back and say, wait a minute, let me understand the business for a second and what we're driving towards, right? And this could be from a security lens perspective, right? You've taken the core executive drivers and you translated this a little bit better in regards to security. And so some of that might be simplification of the security stack, right? Improve threat intelligence, ingestion, and consumption, right? Reduce time to detect, right? And ultimately time to respond, right? Reduce the number of vendors while increasing integration, right? Remember, I'm not saying that a widget from one company is better than another. What I'm saying is there's too many products, right? And how can we be expert in all these different products and be expected to make them all work and integrate and share data? It's very, very hard to do. Protect SaaS-based application, right? We're moving some of these services to SaaS, right? Especially during COVID, we've seen an uptick in that, right? People moved faster to the cloud just because they can offer those services and use things like native TLS to secure that channel, as opposed to forcing users back through a VPN or traditional VPN tunnel. Increase automated response or action to threats in progress. So again, this has reduced the time to respond. Maybe simplify the endpoint, right, for advanced threat, both on and off premise, right? Maybe we want to have integration as part of that, right? And whatever else that you might collect, but it's important to understand what we're driving towards. The next thing that we probably want to focus on is what are we trying to protect against, right? What are the threats and risks to the business? And so it could be simple things like compromise of customer data. It could be credentials stolen and compromised, lack of visibility on the network during an incident, right? Risk of compromised asset off premise, right? If especially with work from home and now we're split tunneling, I've now opened myself up. And there could be times when they're completely disconnected from the environment that they get compromised. Do I have the intelligence captured? Right? If they do get compromised and plugged in to my network because now they're coming back into the office and maybe it moves laterally within the environment, can I put in a control to mitigate my risk? Well, I'm missing a piece of the puzzle. So I might figure out that this asset was compromised. I clean it up, but I don't realize that it's a domain that they're going through that pulled a PDF maybe, right? Or, it was an exploit kit server that they hit and compromised the vulnerability. Maybe I don't know that, right? That's the piece of information I'm missing. And what's happening is, even though I'm trying to put these controls to mitigate the risk, they're constantly coming back in as compromised, right? Because they haven't changed their behavior, nor have you put a control to mitigate the original reason why they were compromised. IoT devices do not support agents. I mentioned this earlier, right? You can't install an EDR product on a light bulb. Just can't do it. But it might need network connectivity, right? Or a UPS or a printer, right? All of these devices are added to the environment. Service impact due to breach, right? And whatever else, right? But get an idea of the executive drivers, the threats and risks to the business, and then we move into the next piece of this, right? And that is the architecture. And not the architecture, understanding the existing technologies in place that makes up our architecture. And so the reason this is valuable, this is going to identify where you have gaps and where you may not have gaps, or where you have a complementing control. And so a vendor might be, vendor A provides AV and advanced malware protection. Vendor B might provide email security. Vendor C might provide NAC, right? And whatever feature capability. Again, we want to understand that and make sure the team understands the capabilities. So when we go through the exercise of really tearing down that use case, we can fill in the holes, right? So that's kind of the first steps, right? Understanding the executive drivers, the threats and risks to the business, and then ultimately the existing investments that we have. And so we'll look at a company, and I choose Acme. But the one thing I did not realize was products from Acme Corporation are often generic, right? So basic and failure prone or explosive. I didn't know that, right? I always thought, Wile E. Coyote was an idiot and didn't know how to operate the products that he was purchasing. I did not know he was the CEO of Acme. But anyways, this is the company, right? And so they do stuff, right? And we've captured the executive drivers. We've captured the threats and risks to the business. We know what technologies they have in place. And now what we want to do is take a step back and say, here's as an example, an internal IT user needs access to the internet. What security elements are required to secure the flow, right? Contractor maybe has access to a data center service or maybe an operational technology, right? What security elements are required to secure that flow? And you get the idea here, right? A light bulb. A light bulb needs access to a building management system. What's the security elements that are required to secure that flow? And so taking a step back and going through this is actually going to highlight more of a storyboard approach to security than I need a firewall, I need email security. It's going to fill in the gaps, it's going to highlight the gaps, and it's a better conversation that you'll have with your executive teams, right? This is why we need this. This is how we went through evaluating where our concerns are. And you shouldn't think about this as budget. You shouldn't think about this of complexity, about deploying multiple different technologies potentially. You don't look at that. Remove all of those barriers and go in and say, I am a security engineer, or I am somebody from the application team, or whatever it might be. I'm an auditor. What things would I need in order to feel comfortable that we've got enough controls in place to mitigate the risks? And so these are what we call places in the network. So we define them, right? Remote access, data center, campus, etc. And what we have here is an admin on-premise user that's accessing the internet, okay? And usually this is a very interactive whiteboard type session that you would have. And here's the capabilities map, right? So green means I've got a capability. Orange means I've got partially addressed, or I purchased but not deployed. So it's on the shelf, right? We haven't had time, but at least we own it. And then ultimately, the red X is capability not addressed, right? So we've identified a significant gap. Orange is still a gap, but the potentially a path forward is it might be easier, right? Because you don't have to acquire maybe a technology. All right, so let's zoom in a little bit here, right? So we've got this flow, and this is kind of how it looks, right? And so I've obviously walked through adding some components, right, that are very common in most environments. So endpoint antivirus, yep, firewall, application control, next-gen IPS, yeah, that's what I have. URL filtering, right? Maybe I've got active VA scanning. Don't see enough of this, but certainly maybe this organization has it, right? SIM maybe in place. So this was captured from the existing technologies, right? So we already know that there's certain components here that we already have. So we can fill that in. But now this is where the conversation gets explored from a different lens. So what we want to do is look at this from an auditor perspective, or maybe an adversarial perspective, right? And now we want to challenge that. Now, I know most people are probably sitting on the edge of their seat going, well, I'd have more than that. Well, I hope you do. But let's assume that this particular flow, and what you'll find is some flows will have more controls or capabilities than others. Let's assume this is what you have. So this is what we want to do next, right? We want to start asking questions, right? Should I be able to connect any asset and get access to the wired network, right? And most people are going to say, probably not. Okay, so I need identity and some type of authorization mechanism. Do I need to understand the type and state of the asset? So when I connect to the asset, is it fit to connect to my organization? All right, I need device profiling and posture. See, there's no technology here, right? There's no vendor here. These are strictly capabilities. Do I need dynamic control based on context of an asset? So if the asset says that it has been maybe compromised over once it's been authenticated, do I want to be able to change the original disposition of that asset and move it into a quarantine or a forensic VLAN? Or when they connect and they unplug and another device gets plugged in, can I dynamically configure the port with the right access control, right? Things like that. And maybe, yeah, I need that. So let's software-defined access, segmentation, dynamic control. What about DNS security? Now, remember, this is an on-premise user going to the internet. The flow for an off-premise user going to the internet may be a little bit different. You may not have all the same freedoms in regards to the capabilities that you would have on-premise. Now, the industry's changing and shifting to provide those capabilities in the cloud, but there's still an immaturity in that market, right? So you add some type of recursion, right, with DNS layer security. Do I need flow analytics, right? Is it important for me to be able to harvest network data and be able to store it, maybe run some algorithms against that data, understand what normal looks like? And again, this is about the group agreeing that, yes, we would need that. And so we add flow analytics. What about network-based malware, right? So you get the idea here, right? Challenge the flow, right? Make sure that you're asking the questions, the team's asking questions, and having a room full of people is certainly going to push the limits, right? Everyone's going to have something to offer and make people ponder and think, right? You're right. Maybe we do need that. What about endpoint detection and response, right? What about passive vulnerability scanning, right? Maybe you don't have active VA, right? Maybe having both or having the VA scan also provide context to other security platforms. These are things that we probably want to think about, right? What about TLS inspection, right? That's key, right? I think I've seen numbers 80 to 90%, depending on who you read. The internet is encrypted, right? So are we blind now? What are we going to be able to do to get past that? And then finally, what we're going to do is wrap this all up, right? Now we know the greens and the oranges, maybe because we have them and maybe we don't have them fully deployed for this particular flow. But now we've identified, we've got multiple vendors, 3. That's pretty good, actually, right? And we've got 15 gaps, right? In this case, maybe not so good, right? The gaps. And now we've got an idea and almost a recipe on how to move forward. And this is going to be a journey, right? But we've got to think about what technologies or capabilities are going to satisfy these gaps. Again, we're not talking about vendors here. Now we look at this. We got endpoint security. We've got DNS security. Maybe NAC can do these functions, right? Maybe next-gen firewall can do all of this, right? We've got some network behavioral analytics. We've got active VA scanning. We've got SIM. Now we've got a plan forward. But the thing you don't want to lose sight of is how do these technologies work together, right? And this is kind of where architecture starts to come in, or platform or fabric, whatever you want to call it. I might need my endpoint security to update NAC. So NAC can maybe take action once the asset's connected to the network passes the authorization or authentication and authorization step, but then later gets compromised, right? Through whatever means. Maybe this technology failed, but gets compromised. But I have an indicator of compromise that lets my NAC know about it, right? You get the idea. Same thing with endpoint in your firewall. Is there some integration here? Can I move the defensive capability farther away from the asset that I'm protecting? Ultimately, as defenders, you don't want to protect at the endpoint. Now, don't say, but what are you talking about? Don't be too quick to judge me here. What I'm saying is you need the controls here. There's no doubt about it, because these defensive capabilities will fail. But this is not where you want to defend. The defending at the endpoint means you have to be 100% correct or you're compromised, right? There's no way around it. the goal as a defender is to push the prevention capability or defensive capability as far away from the asset you're protecting. So maybe it's in DNS, maybe it's at the perimeter, maybe it's right in email, right? But I don't want it to be done on the endpoint. The only reason why I have prevention capabilities on the endpoint is in case those other mechanisms fail. And so again, you get the idea. Think about the integrations and how this all comes together, right? Especially if you're starting a refresh and you're looking at firewalls, you might want to look at how does the rest of the other stuff fit, right? And how does it come together? So how do I share intelligence? How supported is the integration? How much do I have to do out of my team versus natively supported? Do I get systemic response, right? How much complexity did I introduce? So again, there's probably a couple other things you can think of that you could add to this, but that's the thing. You want to challenge this, right? Another option, and this is what I did recently around work from home and the focus at the other B-Sides event that I presented at, was really around looking at work from home. And so there's three kind of core elements. There's one that's VPN-based, one SaaS-based, and one might be direct to internet as an example. And I took a different approach here where I made sure that the detection and response capabilities were just as important or called out, not just the defensive capability, but also the detection and response capability. And so I'm going to move a little bit faster here, just because I think everyone gets an idea of kind of taking that step back. But this is a work from home user going to connect to the internet, right? And so you've got things like patching, right? How do I patch that work from home user? That's interesting because you didn't think that that was too much of a challenge, right? But now it might be, right? How much SaaS-based services are they using? Are they even VPN'd in, right? Can my patching technology get back to the endpoint to patch it, right? Am I using native TLS and internet connectivity to manage that device? You got exploit prevention, system process protection, right? You got advanced malware, right? AV, right? Malicious activity protection, things like what if an activity starts that's encrypting the drive, right? And all the files on the drive, can I mitigate that based on the behavior, right? Or the activity, you know, application blocking, you got network blocking, USB blocking, you get IPS, firewall, fileless malware. You've got, you know, the buzz terms AI or ML, right? But algorithms that can help make sense of what's happening and get better efficacy levels for more advanced threats. And so that's kind of a prevention look at it, right? And again, these controls may exist on the endpoint. They may actually be extended out somewhere in the cloud. They might also be something backhauled and in the on-premise environment. But you got to think about them, right? And now we've got detect and response. So you got EDR, right? Lots of talk around XDR now, right? Because the endpoint is only or EDR is only as good as the endpoint it's installed on, right? It's not going to help my light bulb, any of the network devices that are communicating, right? The camera that starts doing a port scan, right? EDR is not going to help me there at all. So XDR is probably a more broader approach to it. But you have forensic snapshot. How do I take a snapshot of the endpoint if it's off-premise and not connected to the VPN, right? Host isolation. What if it is popped, right, and compromised? Can I isolate it, right? Cloud-based IOCs, you got command line capture, you've got sandboxing, you've got vulnerability software, IP fix. So this is flow correlation. You might think, well, wait a minute, I've got EDR. Don't I get, you know, network-based connectivity based on the process that invoked the behavior? Well, you might, but usually it's limited to a subset of number of connections. Might be, you know, 10 or whatever. Where IP fix, if you can get IP fix flow data, that's every process with every network connection. It's all logged, right? There's nothing missed here. Again, think about on-premise versus off-premise, right? In this case, the flow is really specific to the off-premise user connecting to our VPN. And then you got DNS security, you got web proxy, you've got DLP, you've got TLS decryption, right? AV and advanced malware. And you might be saying, wait a minute, I thought we've got something on the endpoint, so it's in clear text. So why do I need TLS decryption? Well, you're right, but you're defending here, which is much too late. So ultimately, you want to push these capabilities far away from the asset. That means this flow, if it's an HTTPS connection, is encrypted. In order for me to be able to detect it, I've got to tear it apart, right? Advanced malware protection. Again, I need the capability here, but if I can stop it here, I should, right? Now think about the forensic side of it, right? The detect and response. Can I capture all DNS requests, centrally located, use it for forensics? What about full URI capture, right? Not just the domain now, I want the full URI. Sandbox and file analysis. So the reason why I put sandboxing here as more of a detect or respond is because if this is an HTTP stream, as an example, it's very difficult for you to be able to sandbox a file in enough time and get a disposition back without breaking, the time to live within an HTTP connection, right? So it'll time out. That it'll end up timing out. So it's more of a detect response capability versus a prevent capability. And then as we extend it out, again, you've got DDoS, you've got TLS decryption, you've got multi-factor authentication, endpoint posture, geo-control, and you get the idea here, right? You continue to broaden this out. You've got a bunch of defensive capabilities or preventive capabilities here. But think about the forensic side, the detect and response side, right? The data that's going to help you as a threat hunter or incident responder understand what took place. So device insight, right? Denied authentications, host profiling, impact analysis, right? I want the technologies to tell me where I need to focus my time. Think about sandboxing again, right? And now this is this might be more of a web protection. This might be more of a next-gen firewall capability, right? More of a network, L3, L4 type control that seems to have, a file come in, and now you're going to submit it. Flow analytics, event packet capture, event flow correlation, right? These are all things to think about. And then you have a service on the other end that's going to have a whole bunch of other security capabilities as well, right? And so that's pretty good, right? We've got some capabilities here. We're securing our environment. We probably want to run this through, and you can see there's some differences here. Right, here's an internet connectivity, again, accessing maybe a email the device. This could almost look kind of like SaaS here. And this is more SaaS based, right? Again, you can pull out this and put whatever service you want here. And now we've got a good idea. But then you've got to come back and think about those questions again, right? What about integration? What about systemic response, right? How do I mitigate risk? And so, systemically. And so we've got this kind of, understanding of the gaps and what we need to do. But now we've got to think about threat hunting and incident response. You probably want something API based, right? And again, turning every one of these technologies essentially into, I don't know, maybe data ponds, right? They're little ponds everywhere that have real-time data that's on them now, right? Sure, I might need to still send them to a SIM or a data lake. But maybe during hunting, I want to go real time and hit the boxes that are seeing this happen, right? So API based would be certainly an advantage to that and be able to query it. Then you get into orchestration, automation, right? Playbook type styles, like if a phishing attempt happens, execute a forensic snapshot on the endpoint, grab the observations within the email. Maybe that's a SHA-256, it's a link. And query the rest of my technologies that I have and tell me real time whether or not they've seen anybody try to connect to any of these. If they have, now I want to create a Teams room as an example. I want to put in all the right people in the room automatically. I want to create a ServiceNow ticket and maybe pause at that point because I need a human intervention, right? That may want to approve or deny any additional steps, but automate a portion, if not all, of that workflow, right? Because again, we want to keep the job interesting to the people that are there, because I mentioned earlier, there's a shortage or skill set shortage in the industry. And that means, anybody in security is going to be very marketable. And if they're in an organization where they're not adding value and they're chasing false positives, there's a good chance that they're not going to stay for long, right? So let's get rid of the noise. Let them focus on things that really add value to the business. I heard earlier that security is more around a cost center, and it shouldn't be looked as that. It's definitely something that should accelerate the business, right? People want to do business with organizations with strong security postures, and we've got to change that mindset for people to start thinking about that, right? If I have a good security architecture, I should be able to go to market faster. I shouldn't have to worry about that you're now building out this new services and I don't have capacity or capabilities, right? I should be able to fully accommodate that and allow that service to go live securely sooner. And then you've got threat intelligence, right? And what you want to do is go through all your major flows and continue that process. And again, you end up with that storyboard. In closing, there's a couple of other outputs that you want. You probably want to collect all your mitigation priorities or your gaps, right? And identify it. So it could be network segmentation, it could be firewall, it could be, DDoS, it could be SIM, it could be whatever it is. Highlight it, where you are in the world of licensed or partially deployed. You move into maybe some type of matrix that visualizes the gaps. You can put the green ones in here. Most people I talk to don't care about the things that they've already been able to satisfy. They're more interested in focusing on the things that they need to address. And this is an example, right? So you can see each one of these flows have a tremendous amount of red and orange. And this is common in a lot of environments, right? And so you might sit there and say, wow, that looks really bad. Yeah, because it is, right? And visuals matter. And then maybe specific recommendations. And those recommendations might be the priority of things, right? But the problem with this is you might have a priority to deploy, as an example, NAC, because there's a gap, but the effort of that is significant, right? It's not trivial to deploy NAC properly end to end because it touches a lot of different things in a very short period of time. And so what you might want to do is reorder this a little bit, right? And put it in an order that allow you to get the most out of existing investments, as an example, or ease of use of deployment, right? Like, for example, you have investments in a next-gen firewall and you're not using a capability. Maybe you're not decrypting payloads, so you're blind to some of that. Maybe it's, after you do, your analysis around the performance of the box, maybe you turn on TLS decryption, right? Or maybe there's DNS capabilities that don't exist today, but you go to market and find that, it's very trivial to deploy maybe a DNS-based security technology. Same thing with SIM and anything else that falls under the gaps that you might have identified. And that's it. So, anyways, my thought here around is real. I think we need, as an industry, we need to really take a step back, forget about the vendors, forget about the products that exist, forget about all the bells and whistles, and really understand what we're trying to secure. And take a step back and understand our environment. What are the drivers? What are the threats and risks? And focus on those elements and figuring out what capability we need. Then go to market, right? For the things that we need to, fill in those gaps. Talk to the vendors at that point in time. But before that, it's good to have a true understanding of what you're trying to build towards. And this might be a 3 to 5 year journey, but it's a journey that you need to start at some point, right? And, obviously work from home, COVID phase 2, whatever you want to call it, is certainly a driver to maybe take that step, especially for those flows alone. And I'll look here to see if there's any questions. Let's see, what is a typical security flow for an organization who has fully cloud-based infrastructure? So that's a great point, right? So again, depending on what it is that you're servicing, it could be your web tier, your app tier, and your database tier, right? That you could look at the web tier to the app tier as a flow, right? Because they communicate to each other. The app tier to the database tier, again, that's a separate flow, right? Have different controls, one of which could be database security, right? And then you also have your customers or your employees that need to access that web front end. So that web from that user to that web front end is a different flow, right? You'll have internal users might access those resources a little bit differently. And then you also have things like customers that may access those resources and need certain levels of control or mitigate. You need additional mitigating controls, right? Because now you have, somebody accessing an application, for example, that you don't have any control of the disposition of that asset, right? It could be fully compromised. And so things like maybe you highlight the need for two-factor authentication, right? Not just username and password, but also two-factor authentication, right? As an example. So really around, around architecture and certifications. TOGAF is obviously one of them. There's a lot out there. So I don't know that I have recommendations per se. I've not done TOGAF. So I couldn't recommend that per se, but I know lots of people that have done it. I think there's value in doing that, Brody. So I would just check it out and do a little bit more research around it. See Michael there. Thanks, Michael. Arlene, thank you. I don't know if we have to the top of the hour or if I'm over, but awesome. So I will share the slides in PDF form to the B-Sides group. And thanks and have a great rest of your B-Sides Calgary 2-day event.